So Unit 1 was understanding the main idea. And now what we're moving on to is Unit 2, which is summarizing. We're now understanding the main idea, making a connection, and summarizing what we understand. And so really important here is that strong comprehension skills underlie the ability to summarize. What this really points to is that the foundation that you have built in your ASL studies is really what becomes very important in starting to lay the groundwork for interpreting work. So really, it comes down to if you don't understand the message, you can't retell it. But if you have a clear understanding of it, and really the stronger your understanding of a message is, the stronger your summary will be and the more clear and concise it will be. And so this comes from your book, and I'll give you a second to look at it. And really what it's doing here is defining what we mean, or what your book means by summarizing. A brief rendition of the most important points of a passage. So it doesn't mean taking a passage and retelling the whole thing with details. It means giving the gist, the main important points, and maybe some connecting dots. A summary should be concise, which means short and accurate, short and correct. Summarizing is both important for you in your development, but also as a professional tool, because it can be used in various ways. Sometimes the load on an interpreter could become a bit much, and in order to catch up or to stay on task or be able to follow the speaker, an interpreter may take a moment one moment to summarize one package, catch up, and then keep going. They could also use that sometimes when, I know college interpreters or educational interpreters, when a student chooses to take their own notes and looks away, many times they retain information, and then summarize the main things so that they can catch up and move forward. And so really, again, I have to emphasize, you must understand what you're seeing in order to summarize it. And this outlines that again. So a summary can be used by an interpreter in some specific situations, but not all situations. You have to be aware of the audience, the consumer that you're interpreting for, and know the situation. So a summary may be helpful in like I explained, a classroom situation, but it may not be helpful in the entire lecture. It really depends on what you're summarizing. Maybe the student looked down, and during that time the professor started to say key information about an exam. And the point is, the exam is on Tuesday. You cannot be late because you're going to be locked out, and bring a Scantron, and if you don't have one, you will not be allowed to walk in the room. And maybe the professor keeps going on and on with information. And when the student looks up, those are the main points, and that's what you give them. And so in that case, it fits, but it doesn't always fit, and it's not always appropriate. And that's the interpreter's job, to kind of gauge and see where that might be the appropriate response. So your book, according to Peterson, ASL studies use specific techniques to improve comprehension. But in many cases, in interpreter training programs, students have not had enough practice to develop comprehension skills before they're expected to use their expressive skills. So just take a moment to think about your own experience and your own level and where you feel you're at, and if you feel your expressive skills are up to par with your receptive skills, or maybe which you feel you need to work on more. I have seen that in my own experience, and that's why we're here. We're going to get you to fill in those gaps. But it's an important, why I mention it is an important part to understanding why those bricks were laid out the way they were, why the foundation was laid out the way it was in order to get you here to this class. And here's part of understanding a message or a passage: deductive reasoning, in your book described as top-down processing or macro processing. Macro processing is a term for what your brain is doing while you're processing a message, and it really comes down to finding those main ideas and being aware of the relationships between them so that you can then deliver that message. Now, it demonstrates less effort used for processing, which is desirable for interpreters, which again points to when an interpreter understands those main ideas clearly and can understand the relationship between them, meaning understand the point of the communication, there's less effort in, they're not working as hard to deliver that message. And for you, I want to tell you this: you are becoming professional communicators. And I want you to take pride in that. And what I mean by that is your studies are now embarking in learning how to receive a message and pass it on. If you don't understand that message clearly, you can't pass it on clearly and effectively. So if that's your job, to professionally communicate by interpreting language, then in your life as a student, as a worker in any area, as a person, as a friend, as a colleague, you should take pride in communicating clearly, because this is now your goal. Your goal is to be a professional communicator. And so why I mention that is I want to add that that means that you need to be attentive and mindful when receiving communication, and also clear, concise, and attentive when responding to things, which means read directions, read instructions. When you read a question on a test, take time to look at what the question is asking you and not what you think or what you want it to ask you. It means when you send an email asking a question that's already been answered, maybe I should have said, don't send the email asking a question that's already been answered. Look at the information that you've been provided. As a professional communicator, you don't want to be the person making those kinds of mistakes in general, because you want to be professional. So this class is not just about interpreting, but it's also about, remember, the ethics, which directly ties into conduct and professionalism. And that's what I want to impart to you. Take pride in your communication skills. Read things carefully, listen to things carefully, follow directions carefully, and do, of course, ask questions, but make sure that you are asking the right questions and not something that you've just overlooked or that you've not paid close attention to. This is not in your book, but it was something that I wanted to share with you, because if you feel like, hey, I'm that person that I feel like I miss information or I'm not really responding, maybe it's time to take stock of what's happening in our brains. So an interpreter needs a good short-term memory to retain what they've just heard, and a good long-term memory to put the information into context. Putting information into context goes back to that word schema that's in your book. That means I'm hearing this word, I'm hearing this phrase. I know what it means because I can make it fit a concept, or I can make it fit an idea. That your brain is working. And the ability to concentrate is really a factor in your ability to analyze and process what you've just heard so that you can then render the interpretation. So there's really a big demand on your memory happening when you're trying to, and it's not just for interpreting, but just seeing something in a different language that's not your first language. A lot is happening on your memory. And so the purpose of short-term memory training for interpreting is to achieve a better understanding of source language, which will lead to adequate interpreting. So I suggest if you have some exercises you could maybe Google on memory training, just to start to get the wheels turning. I have a small exercise that I want to share with you. I won't share on this video, but I will at a later time, just to start to work on our short-term memory and build up the capacity. So short-term memory, also known as working memory, is what helps an interpreter keep track of what's being spoken in real time, moment by moment. Not just interpreters, but people in general, but I'm applying this to interpreters. But there's limits to that storage capacity. So that example that I gave of an interpreter holding information for a student that looks down to take notes, maybe looks down to read a passage, whatever the case, that interpreter can only hold that information. Those 3 things that we said were important about the test, they're not going to be able to hold it for very long because there is a limit to that capacity. And why do we forget? There's 3 main reasons why there's a loss in short-term memory. 1, displacement means you're holding something new and important came in and you had to let that go to hold something else. That's displacement. Decay, the longer you hold that information, the less of it that you can hold. And interference, maybe some kind of distraction or being interrupted, or you're focusing really hard on holding those 3 important things, and maybe at some point somebody nudges you to say, hey, do you mind moving over because I can't see. You may have just dropped everything you were holding. And there's other reasons. As I outlined there, it could be anxiety, stress, life in general. And why I put that to you is to go back to the point of being a professional communicator now. Think about what impedes you from listening carefully, from being mindful, from responding carefully and appropriately, and from responding so very quickly without maybe fully understanding something. And I admit, I get emails sometimes and I'm so quick to respond, and then if I would really take a minute, which I do sometimes later, and I look, I was so quick to respond with questions and this or that, and it was really all right there. I hate when I do that because I want to pride myself in being a professional communicator. Of course, I'm human too, and so I say this to remind myself also is just take a moment and really try to clearly understand what the message is, because if you don't get it clearly, you cannot provide it clearly, and that's really the point of this unit. So for your assignment, before your assignment, let's talk about retention strategies, which is build focus, exercise your memory, and maybe adopt or develop a note-taking technique. So as you're watching this video, I hope that you're taking notes as you would in any class. You can take notes for things that you see signed. I hope you have adopted a note-taking technique for that. But all of that helps you to retain more information, to build your focus, and to build your memory. Here's your assignment. So please complete and submit 2.1 and 2.2. Thanks.